mean, football's family. And like, if you just hang around this industry, everything comes back around, right? It's why you want to treat people well. You want to be respectful, be prepared, because chances are you're going to cross paths with, hey, that GA or analyst, he might be a head coach 10 years down the line, and you might be calling his game.
Welcome back, or welcome to Y Option. How we doing? We are in week 10. We got Halloween week. We had a great weekend that we just had in college football, and we got Jim Thornby here, co-founder of Y Option as well. Jim, we'll get to Arizona. We'll get there. We're going to talk about them, but we're also going to talk about everything else in college football that might put a smile on football fans' faces, like the Oregon Ducks sitting at number 1 in the nation. And they're going to the big house. So we brought in the expert of the big house, Jake Butt, the former All-American tight end at Michigan, also ended up going to the NFL, and now he's in his third year as a broadcaster for the Big Ten Network as an analyst. He called Michigan State over the weekend, and he's on his way to call Washington, USC this weekend. So we check in with him to learn about Michigan as we talk about this matchup and, of course, talk about all things around college football through the lens of the West. So, Jim, before we get to our wars, I got to check in, man. How you doing on a Monday? How we doing?
Well, I mean, I'm not in a huge rush to get to the Arizona football conversation. Okay. I mean, talking about things that put a smile on your face right now. That's unfortunately not one of them. But, still keeping the faith, even though it's tough right now. But we'll get into that later. But I want to know, because, like, you sent me the picture on Friday. I need to hear a little bit about your conversation with Coach Saban in Bloomington on Friday.
Yeah, so we had a heck of a weekend, right? Had that 9 a.m. Pacific game, second straight week. Body's finally adjusted to it, by the way. I had no problem. It felt like it was a 4 o'clock Pacific game. Had no problem with the early kickoff. But as we all know, Bloomington, of course, as we all predicted, was the epicenter of college football in week 9. College game day was there the week before. Big noon kickoff was there. But with game day, I mean, it is, I was told there's over 125 people on the crew of College Game Day. And I'm thinking, that's awesome, because it's 125 jobs, but also, what does everybody do? Like, I know they have a lot to do, but we all know the talent. So the talent, those that are on air for College Game Day, majority of them were on campus on Friday. Pat McAfee hosted his show, College Game Day. There was a couple hits. And then we all went to practice and went to the walkthrough of Indiana. Curt Cignetti and his team out there trying to remain undefeated. And as I'm watching, I see that legend, Nick Saban, just cruising, of course, with his blazer on, just like he always has it on. And he's sitting there, and he's comfortable, and he's confident, and he's excited as my wife is playing music. Hopefully you didn't hear that here on this podcast, but if you did, that's all right. The flag has been thrown, but we'll be just fine. But to that point, Nick Saban was there. And I'm watching him and Coach Cignetti talk the whole time. Now, Coach Cignetti was on Nick Saban's very first staff, Jim, at Alabama. And year 1 was not great for them at Bama. And I think they won the national championship in year 2, and away the legend goes. Well, you're always asking coaches who have ties to Nick Saban about what it's like, whether it was Dan Lanning or whether it was Lane Kiffin or Steve Sarkisian, and, of course, now Coach Cignetti in the advance of the game. And I see Reese Davis, who's been a good friend to us for years, for decades, actually. Pete Thamel, same deal. But I'm like, I got to go up to Coach Saban. And I turned to Guy Haberman and Rhett Lewis and said, I'm going to go talk to him. They go, well, what's your icebreaker going to be? And I said, I don't know. I'm just going to ask him a football question. I'm going to go have a conversation, right? So there you go. And like, I've met Coach before. I think I still have a voicemail saved from him from like a decade ago, because I called him and be like, hey, can I do a documentary on your team? And we had a conversation. Then I was talking to his agent, and it never went anywhere. But I went up to him, and he couldn't have been nicer, couldn't have been kinder. And he could have been more direct and to the point. So what did you ask him, Yogi? Well, I said, Coach, I work with the Elite 11, the premier quarterback camp in the country. What would your advice be to quarterbacks coming out now, having to navigate the waters of NIL, the waters of the portal, which means that a lot of schools are taking college guys instead of high school guys, and then also social media and just all the things that come with it. It's why we wrote the book, 5-Star QB. It's why we have an award here called 5-Star Quarterback. It's why we send out 5-star advice. Like, we love QB here at Y Option. And we sat there for about 15 minutes and talked about that very position. He talked to me about the challenges, about how you want to make sure, and it's all things that you might imagine, but the people around that young man and that individual have their best intentions, and also being willing to strain through adversity. But it was a real cool conversation. He said it on air, and he said it to me. I don't think he's a fan of where the game is right now, where it sits with a lack of legislation. Hopefully that's coming. I think it'll come. Sounds like it'll be August, late summer when true legislation comes and revenue sharing begins. But it was just kind of cool to talk to him. He shared some stories about Cignetti and their time together. And I said, what was it like? And he goes, well, in his drawl, like that first year, we were pretty bad. But that second year, I think we won the national championship. Like he knew pretty clear how hard it is to build and rebuild. And he just had great respect for a guy that, he used to oversee and coach. And I'd imagine he takes a ton of pride in that. So overall, it was cool. I did light up Guy Haberman. I do also want to give him the assist. As I'm there, Jim, I know I'm being long-winded, but I'm like 20 yards ahead of those guys. Guy and Rhett kind of hang back. And I'm having like a deep conversation. And it hits me in the head like, I might not be around Nick Saban having a one-on-one conversation in an empty field ever again in my life. So I thought about going behind my back like a volleyball player does and like saying like, snap a pic. But I don't. So I'm like, these guys got my back. Of course they're going to take a great photo. Great photo. I get a wide one like this, no zoom in, and I come back and I go, hey, did you get one? And they go, of course we did. All smug, like they nailed it. And I go, this is it? This is it? And Guy's like, well, how about some photo credit? Anyway, that was that. So Guy, I'll give you the photo credit. I'll also light you up for it. Now, and I will say, he took a nice photo of myself and Jed Fish and his wife, Amber. He did a better job on Saturday on game day. But with the guru at game day, it was a miss. He was lucky he called a great game because Guy Haberman knocked that out of the park.
Well, it's funny because you mentioned about his relationship with Cignetti too. And like, so when they had Cignetti on the set on Saturday morning and they asked him about like back then, and Saban said he's one of the most confident coaches that he's ever had because like, right in that early time, all of a sudden the Kent State job became available and it was like a terrible job at the time. And it seemed like he wasn't really advising any of his guys that like, oh, hey, you should get this. But he just, in a meeting, just goes, hey, Kent State's available. Anybody want it? Signetti's hand just went right up. Like, I got it. And Saban was like, all right, well, we'll help you get that one. So it was pretty funny. But it's definitely a cool experience for you to be able to have that moment with the legend there.
Yeah, it was cool. It was cool. And those guys were all great. Reese and I got stories about him and Pete. They've always been so helpful to us here at Y Option and our career. We'll try to get those two on as the season progresses. But we have a weekend of awards. They are our Go awards. And you know the deal, Jim. Hopefully our audience does now as well. Every week, we select 4 players or coaches to get these awards. We do it in conjunction with our partner 76. And the bottom line is this: from the thrill of victory to the heartbreak of defeat, because there were some heartbreaking defeats and there were finally some wins, like Cal and SC finally got one, from playing a gritty ball on the field to inspiring people on the sideline. Or I got our headset here, or our coach of the week every week. College football, bottom line, is driven by go-getters, period. They pump passion into every play, and that's why we have partnered with 76 to create the Go-Getter Awards, celebrating the players, the plays, the coaches who go above and beyond. They do special things. We spend a lot of time debating who should win these awards, and we give it to those who just continue to go. No surprise that all of the award winners this week, Jim, have had to meet adversity and work through it. Share our Go-Getter Awards from this week.
Well, you mentioned Cal and SC, so I'll definitely start with the two of them. So 5-star QB there, Fernando Mendoza, career high, 364 pass yards, 299 of those in the first half. He had 2 touchdowns through the air, had his first receiving touchdown. Now, he doesn't actually get – the funny thing is he has 1 career receiving touchdown, 0 career receptions, because he threw the ball to Javian Thomas, and then Thomas – pitched it back to him as he came through. So he gets credit for the receiving touchdown, even though he does not have a reception in his career. So little unique stat there. Gone, Makai Lemon was really a breakout game for him. 4 catches, 134 yards. Plus he had the 80-yard kickoff return, which in the first time of him really being the primary kickoff returner. He had a 70-yard catch. He had a 40-yard touchdown. I mean, he was electric in that game. That dude, Washington State, we've talked plenty about their offense this season. The defense came up big. Ansel Dinboo, career high 3 sacks in that win over San Diego State. And then the headset hero, we got to go Kalani Sitake. Somehow they were a 7-0 team playing a 3-4 team. Granted, it was on the road, but still, they were a 2.5-point underdog. So Kalani made sure that they will not be underestimated again. They got off to a big lead. UCF had a couple of late touchdowns that made the score seem closer than the game was. But Kalani and the Cougs, 8-0, 5th time in program history. Now the 2nd time that's happened under Kalani. So 2 for him and 2 for Lavelle Edwards. That's not bad. That's not a bad situation to be in there for the guy that he played for.
Amen. So congratulations to them. We kicked it all on social media. Check it out, reshare it. If it's one of your teams, you should be really proud of how, especially the first 2 in Cal and SC, have responded. For Washington State, we're going to get into them in a minute because they don't play. They don't play until the first CFP rankings are already released in a week and some change. Where are the Cougs going to be ranked? We'll have an argument and a position for them. And then for BYU, Kalani Sitake went from hot seat to Coach of the Year candidate. I mean, Kurt Signetti and him, you could argue it's a 2-horse race right now in that regard. I'm trying to think off the top of my head, like who else is in that conversation. I understand what Miami is doing. I understand what other undefeated teams like Oregon are doing, but year 1 in Indiana, come on, man. And then BYU coming off of last year and the struggles they had in the Big 12 to now, right? What was the tweet you sent me? It was like, oh yeah, Big 12 standings made perfect sense in preseason.
They were just turned directly upside down.
Directly upside down. So here we go. All right, so let's dive into it. Yeah, more on that. All right, let's talk about, and we'll rip through this here in the Big Ten. Oregon, they continue to dominate. I mean, they are the more physical team pretty much every time out, right? They won it against Ohio State, not dramatically. Ohio State is an elite team, but I thought if you were going to give an edge on the physicality, they have that. They dominated a traditional physical Illinois team. There's a great video going around on social media about everybody saying, Illinois is so physical. Can Oregon handle the physicality? Like, eliminate the Pac-12, Big Ten historicals. Like, Oregon is one of the most physical teams in America, and they ran through Illinois. And Illinois is a pretty stout team. Their only 2 losses are to Penn State and now Oregon. Oregon looks like the number 1 team in America. We said it here first. We'll continue to champion it. Ducks are rolling. They go to Ann Arbor. More on that, of course, with Jake. But Big Ten title race. We got Indiana. We got Penn State, Ohio State. Jim, you know tiebreakers better than anybody. Not asking you to go there. But when you look at the title race, where do you go?
Well, I think obviously, I think Oregon has the edge here because the 3 teams that are undefeated, Oregon, Indiana, Penn State, of those 3, they all do. None of them play each other. But they all do play Ohio State. And Oregon's already played Ohio State and beaten them. So to me, that's the definite leg up in that conversation. Now, Penn State has the chance this weekend because they've got Ohio State coming into town, which should be a nuts game. Now, not sure what the status of Drew Aller is going to be for Penn State in that game. I think James Franklin said on Monday morning that might go all the way up to game time. So we'll continue to monitor that news as we go. But for Indiana, they, on the flip side, they might get their quarterback back this week. And then they don't play Ohio State for a few more weeks. So they have a couple more built to this. So it's Ohio State is going to determine who is going to play in the Big Ten championship, whether or not it's them or not. They're going to, because of their upcoming games with Indiana and Penn State, they're going to kind of have the key to that. And I know Jake's going to talk about this a little bit more in the interview, but the question mark is around that offensive line. They lost their left tackle in the Oregon game. The backup got hurt in the Nebraska game. They couldn't run the ball. Ohio State is not feeling super Ohio Statey right now, for lack of a better term. So, I think right now it's Oregon and whoever can beat Ohio State.
I am going to be so curious, Jim, to where the committee views Ohio State. I get that they have a game, but I say that of like at the end of the year, let's just say they have 2 losses, because we're going to get into Washington State here in a second. Their roster, no doubt, you could argue it's the best in the country. But if they have 2 losses and don't play in a championship game, do they get in over, call it a 1-loss Washington State? Probably. But I don't know. Like, how do they view them? Like, I think it's going to be fascinating to see how the committee nets out with like what they see on the field and what the potential is if you have a couple weeks off.
I think a 2-loss Ohio State team still gets in. I mean,
agree with you.
You know, because if they're a 2-loss team, that means they beat either Penn State or Indiana.
Yeah.
You know, to get to that point. Now we get to 3 losses. Now it's who knows. But the funny thing is, like, I know I saw on Monday morning your guys' show on Big Ten Network, and they had the projection of the 4 teams getting in, and that was the most. And I think there's a pretty good shot of them getting 4. But the funny thing is, I don't think when you really look at it, it's these 4 and really nobody else has a chance. Like, it's not like you're like looking in the wings of being like, oh, well, this team, you know, maybe this team gets hot or whatever. It's really these 4 teams because oddly enough, with this many teams in the league, it is a top heavy league with these 4 teams. Yeah. You know, that next tier is really a tier down in my eyes right now. And I think, not just mine, but I think everybody else's. But I think that's going to be interesting to see how these 4, you know, maneuver around each other. And to your point about how the committee is going to think, I'm more interested to see what they think of Indiana.
Fair, me too.
Because if their name is not Indiana, if they're not playing in Bloomington, like, they're probably 6 or 7 spots higher in the rankings. Yeah. Now, granted, like, what right now would you consider Indiana's best win? Is it Washington? Is it Nebraska? Like, there's not necessarily that signature win. Like, they still have, like, the rest of their schedule is at Michigan State this week. Then they got Michigan and Ohio State. So they still got, like, some meat on that bone. But, like, what do you consider maybe that, like, the best win for them so far?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm looking at their schedule now. I've called 2 of their games. I think it'd be Nebraska.
Yeah.
Right? They drill Nebraska. Nebraska has every opportunity to beat Ohio State on the road. I got Nebraska this weekend against UCLA, so I think I'll have an even better feel for them. I'm a big fan of Matt Rule. We've said that on this show many times. We'll get him on in the offseason for sure. Thoughtful, dialed, detailed, freshman quarterback. Freshman quarterback has just struggled. Dylan Raiola has, I think, thrown 5 picks and no tugs in his last handful of games after starting the season so hot, not turning it over. It's what freshman quarterbacks are going to do in, you know, the deepest conference in America. So I'd say that is the game. And you're right. I'm so curious to watch them play. I just think I've seen enough good scheme from them and good football from them that I don't think they're going to get blown off the field by anybody.
Right.
You know, so you look at their schedule, you're right. At Michigan State, that's as hard as any of these things. Yeah. Right? Like, to be honest with you, but because of the losses Michigan State has, they're not going to get a ton of credit, right? Michigan State.
Exactly.
Yeah. So it'll be one of those perception games. Like, I think even if Indiana is wearing Washington's logo, they're ranked in the top 5 in America, playing the same teams, just because what Washington did a year ago in terms of going to the championship game. So if they're SC, they do the same thing. They're a top 5 team. Like, there is something to that.
I will tell you, they're in the top 5 at the Sports Source Analytics, which are the stats that the committee in the room is actually looking in. They're ranked in the top 5, you know, in that category. So I think we're going to see them get a lot more credit in that room than we've seen probably from the AP voters, assuming they pull off the win in East Lansing this weekend.
Yeah, which is a big if. That's a tough place to play. And I'll say Indiana, they haven't really had a challenging road game. They went to Northwestern that is unique. They dominated a less than full UCLA at the Rose Bowl from the first snap when Ethan Garbers fumbled the ball, if you can remember that back in September. So this is going to be a real test for them. To your point, do they have Curtis Rourke? We'll see. Do they go with Taven Jackson? We'll see. I definitely know that this is the most we've ever talked about Indiana on a podcast. So love to Kurt Signetti and the city of Pittsburgh, because it's producing just winners right now. Pitt undefeated. Shout out. Hail to Pitt. I love that. I love them being in the playoff conversation.
Ready, set. Use French fries to go. Yeah, oil from French fries. Turn yesterday's leftovers into today's fuel. More power, lower emissions. 76 renewable diesel fuels all the ways you go, go, go.
I want to talk to you about Washington State. Washington State's in a unique scenario, as the world should know. Okay, we're going to help out our friends if you don't know. They're in a conference with only one other member, 2 total. They cannot win a quote-unquote traditional conference championship. They are not in the conversation when it comes to the highest-ranked conference champions getting automatic buys. That is not how it works for this year in the Pac-12 or next year in the Pac-12. But the Cougs enter their bye week with only 1 loss on the road at a Boise State team that seemingly is looking like they're going to go win the Mountain West and maybe win the Heisman Trophy with their star running back, Ashton Ginty. So, to your point, Jim, about the CFP, the Cougs got a week and a half or so to make a case. What is your case for them right now to being in the CFP conversation? Because I think it would surprise a lot of people in the Midwest, in the South, to see them steal an at-large bid from one of those 2 power conferences, or even in the Big 12 or the ACC, whoever may lose in their respective title game.
Yeah, and I mean, we're going to be realistic here. They have to win out for them to be part of this conversation. But let's look at where they're at right now. They are one of 15 teams in college football that are 7-1 or better. They're one of 10 teams that are 2-0 or better versus power conference opponents. They have the win over Washington. They have the win over Texas Tech. You can only play who's on your schedule, and they've played power conference opponents and won both of those games. Now, granted, right now UW and Texas Tech are not doing them a lot of favors. They need them to be at the end of the year to be looked at as quality wins. But if Boise State keeps doing what they're doing and wins out the rest of the way, and you can look back and they're an 11-1 team, and their only loss is to a Boise State team who, at that point, if Boise State wins out, they're going to be a top 10 team. They will be in the conversation. 100% be in the conversation. Now it's going to have to depend on what happens in all these other conferences, but they will be as part of that conversation. They're 3-1 against teams that have winning records right now, and again, that 1 loss is to Boise. They're only one of 19 teams that have 3 or more wins against winning teams, and they win the close games. They're 4-0 in games decided by 8 points or less. So there's enough there for them to be a part of the conversation. At the end of the day, there's going to be so many moving parts, and of course them having to win it all, but they deserve to be a part of the conversation moving forward.
Yeah, and I'll just say this to put an addendum on what you said, because you nailed all of it, is that just to give people some perspective, this is the week that respective conferences talk to members of the CFP. Every conference, including the Pac-12, has 2-point people that are responsible for their respective conference. So Teresa Gould and company will get on the horn later this week and present the best case scenario for every team in their league. And they have 2 cases: CFP consideration, top 25 consideration. How do we know that? We've been in those rooms with the Pac-12 over the handful of the last couple of years. The number one thing that I believe Teresa Gould, the commissioner of the Pac-12, is going to do is remind the 2 respective committee members to then take to the rest of the committee is that Washington State is a Power 4 conference team. Period. They're a power team. They've beaten Wisconsin in consecutive years. They beat a Big Ten team in the last 3 seasons, right? Wisconsin on the road, Wisconsin at home, UW, call it a neutral site, but it was in Seattle down the street from where UW plays. And then, of course, what they did to Texas Tech absolutely dominated them in a home game. That, to me, is the jumping off point. So they're viewed as such based on their record. I get who they play, but you just asked me who is the best team that Indiana played. Could we put Indiana's schedule up against Washington State? You can. You could have an argument. I'm not going to say it's not better, it's not worse, but FIU, Western Illinois, Charlotte as non-conference are not Texas Tech, Washington, and the rest of their conference, I guess. They're all
Boise, they're all non-conference.
Yeah. So I just think it's a fair discussion, and I know she's going to nail it when she gets into that room. Okay, let's talk about some struggles that are surprising. Yeah. We both picked Arizona to play Utah in the Big 12 title game. We wanted that to happen. Then we wanted the winner to play Oregon and just have like a party on the West Coast. Neither one of those teams are going to any title game, in my opinion, this year in terms of Arizona or Utah. Arizona State, they've been a surprise. What do you make of the Pac-12 teams that are now struggling in the Big 12.
Yeah, it's funny because, Arizona, we just had the CFP conversation at the beginning of the year. We were expecting that Arizona and Utah would be part of that CFP conversation. Right now, both of those teams are going to be lucky to go to bowl games. Yeah. Arizona's 3-5, Utah's 4-4, and I'm not sure which one I'm more surprised at. I mean, if you would have told me that, of what happened with Cam Rising, then I would say I'm not necessarily surprised by them being 4-4. I'd still be a little bit surprised. I think they'd be a little bit better than that, but things just are not clicking there. And then you look at Arizona, and we're still struggling to figure out why this isn't working. I think that's the craziest part. It's not like you can just say, "Oh, this isn't working" or "That's not working." Now, obviously, their defense is just mauled by injuries. I mean, absolutely crushed by injuries. And they did their best to hang in the last few weeks defensively. But it seems like that's really starting to take a toll and is going to be a big problem going the rest of the way. I saw Justin Spears, our guy, he tweeted out about the middle eight that Arizona so far this year, which I know is a stat that you love and is another stat that the committee looks at as well. So the first 4 games in the middle eight, Arizona outscored their opponents 34-0 in the middle eight. Last 4 games, the exact opposite. They've been outscored 34-0. So I don't know what to make of Arizona right now. I really don't.
Yeah, well, that thing can take your soul. I really think the middle eight, Guy Haberman, my partner, hears me say it every weekend. Like, I just think it's so vital on momentum. Chris Peterson always says you can guarantee 3 things in every game: momentum swings. You can guarantee random acts occurring that you couldn't anticipate, right? A lineman going down, a crazy, wacky penalty. And also the final one is adversity. How are you going to react, or are you going to respond? And I think that both of those teams, they are in it. There is a commonality. They both made changes in the season to their offensive coordinator and play caller. It's an offensive-driven game. Analytics would prove it. I think us here at Y Option would believe that. I think most people we talk to would think that as well. All right, real quick, Heisman is beginning. The conversation is beginning. Got a Heisman vote. Next episode, I'm going to take you through my 10 points that I look at to win the Heisman. We'll take you through the final month of the season, what we are thinking here at Y Option regarding the Heisman. I have no problem doing that. But as always, we're bringing a guy or bringing a guest who we think can inspire, enlighten, educate in college football through the lens of the West Coast. So we go away from the West Coast. We actually go to the Midwest. Jake Butt, he resides in Chicago. He grew up in Columbus, Ohio. He played football at Michigan at the Big House. He's an All-American there. Played in the NFL. Had some adversity around injuries, but now he's calling big-time games in major college football. He's a colleague. He's a friend, and he's our interview today. As always, every interview is presented by our founding partner, 76, keeping you in the know as you are on the go, go, go. Jake is on the go. He's calling the game in Seattle, UW SC. He was just at Michigan State. So Oregon fans, you're going to want to listen. UW SC fans, you'll be all over this. And if you just want a different perspective on college football through the lens of the West, Jake gives a great one. Here it is, our interview today, Jake Butt. And here he is, folks, Jake Butt, the Michigan man who grew up in Columbus. Welcome to Y Option, man. Great to have you. Thanks for making some time.
Yeah, man. I took the road less traveled, right? I've seen both sides of that rivalry. So great to finally join you, man. Excited to be on here.
Yeah. So how do you characterize your football life where you sit now? Is your 3rd year, I think it's calling games on the Big Ten Network. You were a talented recruit. You had an elite career at Michigan. I mean, you've had a lot of highs and lows naturally, but some that the world got to see. So I'm curious, when you look at your football journey to date, where do you net out as we're in week 10 of college football?
Yeah, I mean, you heard this 100 times where like football, the best coaches would always say football's a metaphor for life. And like, that's kind of how I characterize it. As you said, I've experienced higher highs than I ever would have thought growing up and lower lows than I ever thought were possible too, through some of those injuries. And it's kind of been a beautiful journey in that sense. It's funny. My freshman year of high school, I grew up playing soccer and basketball, and I never wanted to play football. So I played a few years. I tried to quit football, and my dad would wake me up every morning and drive me to summer conditioning. And I've tried to go away from the game. And then you fall madly in love with it. And my time at Michigan, the journey that I took there and playing for Coach Harbaugh and helping go from a really low as a team at Michigan to back-to-back 10-win seasons and getting to taste some of that glory individually and as a team, fall madly in love with it, only to deal with these injuries, and after I retired from my third ACL, I was like, man, kind of back to my freshman year of high school. I was like, I'm done with football. I didn't want anything to do with it. I didn't really want to even watch it that fall. It was too painful. And now I'm fully back in it again, getting the chance to. Big Ten Network gave me an opportunity to call the Michigan spring game. I knew I would love this career because of how nervous I was in the booth. The butterflies I got, I was like, holy cow. I was wondering if I'd ever get butterflies like that again after I retired from playing. And now third year with the Big Ten Network, third year in the media space. What a freaking time for us to be covering this sport too. Like the drama, the parody, the highs, the lows, the emotions. The spirit of college football is, when you compare the NFL and college, the spirit of college football is evident every single week. So in a long-winded way, man, I feel like my journey has really proved the truth that football is a metaphor of life.
Yeah, well, you've proven to me like you got this sage side to you. Like I feel like you're probably late 20s, and
29.
You're 29. Okay, cool. Like I feel like you could be 49 just on how you view life. You've got a great maturity. It's been such a blast being a part of your team and everybody that you referenced at the Big Ten Network. But with that, I want to ask you, because you referenced some of the lows that you've had. I think sometimes players who transition from playing to the booth, and in the world we're in now, it's like the hotter the take, the more popular you can become. I'm wondering if your adversity has impacted how you view a game and the thoughtfulness that you have as a broadcaster and a color commentator when you're in the booth and you see not necessarily just an injury, but you see a poor play or you see a bad call, or you see something where you can be super critical, or you can choose to be super thoughtful, or maybe there's somewhere in the middle. I'm curious if there is a lens for you based on your career that you bring into the booth on Saturdays.
Yeah, listen, man, we have to be honest in our career too. And, the one thing I've told myself is if I dropped a big pass on third down, I don't need the producer to say that's a bad drop, or the analyst to say that's a bad drop. As a competitor, I should say that. If a coach makes a bad call, he shouldn't care that I'm saying it. We should know that we should all hold ourselves to that standard anyways. But as far as the takes, man, respect is everything in this game. And I've been very thoughtful about, you can be critical without being disrespectful of the individual. And there's a number of different ways. I'm not in this industry to advance my career through hot takes. I just love the game of football, and I want to talk about what I see through my preparation and through being present in that game, in that individual moment. And that's really the standard. And sometimes, man, as you know, it doesn't come off perfect. Like sometimes I say some things, I'm like, could have said that differently. But we have to be honest in this career too. Otherwise you really don't have credibility in the booth.
Yeah, I'm a big fan. And I think you're like this, in terms of preparation allows you to be honest. I had a mentor once, guy, everybody knows, his name was Pete Carroll. And I remember when I first became a broadcaster, he goes, "Who are you going to be?" And I said, "Oh, I'm going to be Herbie." And he goes, "Well, what happened to Yogi?" And I was like, damn, pretty good point.
Yeah.
And he goes, "Go to work on your style, your vision, your theme, and your philosophy, and then come back to me and let's talk about it." So I went to work over the summer. I was 26 at the time. I wrote 36 pages and I handed it to him, and he looked at it, flipped through it. He goes, "Put them each in a sentence. Nice work." And it was really a cool experience for me. And where I netted out was everything is going to be based on fact first, opinion second.
Yeah.
But you can't gather the facts until you prepare. So I'm curious, you're calling Washington SC this weekend, like an old Pac-12 matchup. Everybody here on the West Coast is enthused about it, even though neither team is really in the conversation for the postseason. And that's, of course, the hopes and dreams of every player. But how are you preparing for that? And what facts are you learning about Washington and USC as it's early in the week, but I know you've been diving into the preparation?
Yeah, well, first off, when you mentioned Pete Carroll and I have Jim Harbaugh, like that's probably one of the best parts of the sport is you get true mentors, and the best coaches have an impact. Why Pete's a legend and why Jim's a legend. for me, it has nothing to do with the X's and O's. It's like the impact beyond the field. So I appreciate you sharing that. That's a really good note. It's been fun to learn though, and I called Washington Weber State week 1, so that was a big deal for me. Is like learning, how do these fans view their program? Like, what's important to them? How do they view this whole strange time we're in? And what I came away from on the Washington side is, this is the most underrated program in college football. When you think about it, before this season, there's a very short list of teams that can say they went to the college football playoff twice and the national championship once. And yet we don't mention Washington with the Blue Buds. The fans have a standard. The fans want to see success. And I think that's why it's been frustrating to see them fall short at times. The same is true for USC. Like, there is a rich tradition and history of team success and national titles and Heisman winners and great players. And that's why this offseason was so urgent for Lincoln to go out and get Danton Lynn and start to implement. Man, we know Lincoln has great offenses, but some of those USC defenses in the early 2000s in history was physical. When we think about Big Ten defenses, that's what USC has been at their best. And as it spins to this game, it's such a critical game for both programs, but certainly for Lincoln Riley, because, I mean, we see the articles, highest paid coach in the Big Ten right now. I mean, the investment from an NIL standpoint, we're used to him being able to put up. I just thought of this as, hey, Lincoln Riley, the easy choice is he's going to have a Heisman candidate quarterback. They're going to put up 35 points a game, and Danton Lynn's going to fix the offense, and they're going to win a ton of games. And they've had their chances, but they've lost in a historic fashion late in these games a number of times, and they got to find a way to finish. And this game is but where these teams are at, this is going to be a close, competitive, important game for USC. Gosh, can they find a way to get over that mental hurdle? At some point, it becomes your identity, Yog. Like, you wonder, oh, here we go again. If you make a mistake in the second half, you got to avoid that thought of saying, here we go again. So I'm really interested in the mental side of this weekend.
Yeah, I think it's going to be huge. Okay, go back. Here's a little homework for you. I think it's 2017, year SC beats Penn State in the Rose Bowl, and Sam Darnold plays at Washington. He throws, to this day, a top 5 throw to me on a third down conversion over the linebackers in front of, it felt like over everybody and in front of everybody. It was literally a top 5 throw, and it was on the lake up in Seattle. And I just think that the history of this, I'm sure you and Jeff and the crew are dialed on it, but you go back to this rivalry. I can remember Pete Carroll's team, when Steve Sarkisian takes over at Washington, year 1 for UW. They almost beat LSU in their opener, and I think 2 weeks later, they knock off a top 5 USC. So there's been fun battles back and forth. So grab some of those from the archives for this ball game if we get a tight one late, because it has been fun to watch these two on the West Coast battle back and forth. Fired up for you and Jeff and company. That'll be a good one, man.
2017 USC on the road versus Washington. Sam Darnold is the homework. All right, I'm gonna look that up.
Yeah.
That Rose Bowl game,
Yeah.
Penn State
Yeah.
USC, was still to this day one of the best football games I've ever seen. So that's easy homework for me, man. I'll go back and check that out for sure.
I know you will. Okay, let's talk about you got a really cool opportunity. Last weekend, you called a rivalry game, Michigan State. Curious what that was like. When you reference SC in Washington, you played for Jed Fish.
Yes.
So you're going to call again a Washington game with someone who coached you. You're also, you just called a game with a program that you know dramatically well, of course, with Sharon Moore in his first year as the head coach. What's it like to call games with people that you are so close to as a player?
Yeah. Football's family. And like, if you just hang around this industry, everything comes back around, right? It's why you want to treat people well. You want to be respectful, be prepared, because chances are you're going to cross paths with, hey, that GA or analyst, he might be a head coach 10 years down the line, and you might be calling his game, right? So that it all comes back around. I think that's probably, to me, the best part of every single week, besides calling games, is the meetings. And a lot of times, when you listen to the press conferences, there's not too much to ask that isn't really asked throughout the week. So those meetings I end up talking about just life philosophy. Like, David Braun last year, we ended up talking just for an hour about his journey as a head coach and how he, raises his kids and his priorities with family. And of course, Northwestern goes on to have a successful career. Like I talking to Jed Fish week 1, his journey, some of the great coaches he's been able to kind of pluck information from. That stuff's so cool to me. And, for Sharon last week, those meetings, you could feel the importance and the intensity and the absolute urgency to win that game. I mean, that was a must win for Michigan. And then they go out and execute in the things that they told us that they needed to do in the meeting. One of those being trick plays. When Sharon was calling plays, they were good for one flea flicker a game in the biggest moments. And I said, hey, guys, we haven't really seen these trick plays. And they're a little bit limited offensively. They're like, yeah, expect to see that this week. And I know how much effort Kirk Campbell and Alex Orji, Davis Warren, all those guys put into this season. So I know how much it meant for him to call those plays and then to see it succeed and for them to win the game. Again, like that's just, it's cool. You work year round for 12 guaranteed opportunities. Some seasons are magical and you win a bunch of games like Michigan last year, 15-0. Some seasons are frustrating like what they're dealing with right now. But every win is earned and the right to celebrate. There's nothing better.
Okay, so you referenced GAs. I remember meeting Dan Lanning. Heard about him when he went to Pitt, and then I met him when he was at Arizona State. Young, baby-faced GA, and now he's taken up a ton of oxygen that your former head coach and I believe Nick Saban have left when they departed college football for either retirement or the NFL. I look at Oregon and I think they sit at the top of the Big Ten, and then we could have a conversation about who do you think should be the second best team, just based off what we saw over the weekend. Of course, they had an epic game against Ohio State that could have gone either way, but they won it. They dominated Illinois. Now they're going to play your alma mater in Michigan. Michigan, to me, is playing their best ball of the season with what they did. Trick plays, utilizing different playmakers. Finally, Alex Orji has a role, it looks like. What do you make of this game with the number one team in America going into a pretty big house?
Yeah, in order to, you have to have an identity to win at a high level. Like you have to know exactly who you are to win the way Oregon's winning right now. And that's what's so impressive to me. And that comes back to leadership, like Dan Lanning, to be a young coach. Sometimes I just feel as a young coach, and it's true as a young player, you think but maybe you don't have enough experience and trials to really know. But Dan Lanning, he knows exactly who he is as a person, as a coach, and then that's infectious and trickles on down through the roster. What an explosive offense. And they can just do it in so many different ways, including special teams, just dangerous and dynamic. And with that note, Michigan, they know who they want to be, but this year they haven't lived to that standard. They're replacing 6 offensive linemen from last season, a top 10 pick in J.J. McCarthy, their top 2 wide receivers. Blake Corum was their leader, not just their best running back, was their absolute leader in heartbeat. So it's taken them some time to kind of get there. I think the big thing that we've seen too, Yog, is the quarterback play. It's true for any young quarterback. You go through growing pains. The challenge for Michigan is they've had to do that 3 separate times. Davis Warren is going through his growing pains, and then they go to Alex Orji. So they're starting from square one again. And Alex Orji's going through his growing pains. And then bang, they go to Jack Tuttle and they're starting from square one again. And now they came all the way back around to Davis Warren. That kind of caps the development of the rest of the offense as a whole. So as you mentioned, that last week was critical for them. And in Michigan State, they're not competing for a conference title this year, but Joe Rossi is a brilliant defensive mind. They were coming off a dominant win over Iowa, where they shut down, outside of one carry, the Big Ten's best running back this year in Caleb Johnson. So for it to come kind of all the way together, Michigan's not going to be favored versus Oregon or Indiana or Ohio State, but momentum's a big thing. And what I'm curious to see is, did that win last week, does that have a chance to inspire this team to win some of these games where they're going to be underdogs starting this weekend against Oregon? But again, it's going to be really tough to beat Oregon because they don't beat themselves, and they know exactly who they are. They're almost unshakable and unflappable in that sense.
Who do you think is the second best team if Oregon, you're in agreement, is at the top right now? And I know it's hard because you probably just finished watching the Indiana-Washington game and probably watching real-time Nebraska-Ohio State. So it's hard to not just have the immediate thing in your memory. But where do you net out there right now?
Right on the tip of my tongue, it's Ohio State. And yet I look at that Nebraska game, and this is a perfect chance because we saw Indiana and what they did to Nebraska. We see Ohio State and what they did to Nebraska. I believe Tony White, I believe that was an anomaly versus Indiana more than like adjusting expectations for Nebraska's defense. I'm concerned about the Buckeyes. I'll say they're number 2 right now. I'm concerned about that offensive line because they lose Josh Simmons, their left tackle. Then their backup comes in and they lose him. And all of a sudden, they could not run the ball at all versus Nebraska. And we know we know Jeremiah Smith, and we know Emeka Ibuka, we know Judkins and Trey Henderson. They have the sports cars in the garage, but the engine for any great team is the offensive line. That's what's capped them in these past few years. And to win at a high level, Michigan, they win the national title. They imposed their will in the biggest games. Washington, was the runner-up. They won the Joe Moore Award. They imposed their will. Georgia, the 2 years prior, the engine was dominant offensive line play. I am concerned right now about the Buckeyes offensive line, and that's where it makes it a bit more of an interesting question because I really like what Indiana has done in terms of being multiple offensively. I like the way their offensive line has played, and certainly how dynamic they look when Curtis Rourke is in there. I'll give it to the Buckeyes right now, but it's a close battle. And the Buckeyes, that is a tough challenge coming up this weekend, going on the road versus Penn State. Man, you better be able to run the ball, going into that environment. You better be able to run the ball. So I don't know how they get it done, but they're going to have to find a way.
Yeah, it's been fun every week, man. From my lens, new into the league. 4 new teams are into the league from your lens. You've been around this league since you were a baby, right? You grew up in Columbus, as we said off the top. You've been watching Big Ten football for as long as you could probably recall. But I'm curious, what has it been like as we enter November with this new look Big Ten from your vantage point as a guy who's going to UW for the second time this weekend, I think going to Eugene for the first time the following weekend, and experiencing this new league and no longer 2 divisions?
Man, it's been fun. It's been fun. It's delivered on its promises that we're going to see more parity, more competitive balance, more upsets, more surprises. It's been a joy. And I try not to, if you're living in any extreme where some people said this is the end of college football between that and the transfer portal and NIL, that's not right. And then to say that this is perfect and there's not going to be downside to this expansion, that's not right either. But it's been a fun year to cover. And I give a ton of credit to the coaches too, because the adjustments you have to make to travel across these time zones and to manage your roster with how competitive and deep the conference is on a week-to-week basis. I've learned a lot listening to them. And what we've seen is, gosh, I remember going to camps in high school where you look at all the best players and they're all going to Alabama or they're all going to Georgia. And there was a handful of teams that would hoard all the talent, and that led to dynasties. Now, if you're a 5-star, you're not sitting on the bench. You're going to go to where you can play and produce right now. So the talent disbursement has never been better. And it leads to just fun matchups and surprises and upsets. So just as a fan, I've just been enjoying it every single weekend.
Okay, so before we cut you loose, give us your best Jed Fish story as you're on your way up to Montlake to call SC Washington later this week.
Yeah, what I love about Jed Fish, we never took the field at a disadvantage. Never took the field. There was a plan and an answer for every single situation. And some teams would say, hey, sometimes we just have a bad play call, all good, let's go move on to the next play. Never did we take the field at a pre-snap schematic disadvantage with Jed as the head coach or as our play caller. I'm trying to think of some good stories, but I just respect him so much. I thought he's one of the brilliant football minds that I've ever played for. And his story too. I mean, his journey. He didn't have a football background. He didn't play growing up, and he's leaving stick-it notes on Steve Spurrier's car, basically saying, "Give me an opportunity." And the journey he's taken just by sheer will to become a head coach. That's the best story, in my opinion. Just the journey he's taken to get where he is right now. And yet, like you talk about manifestation, like the coaches he's had the chance to learn under, Bill Belichick, Sean McVay, Jim Harbaugh, Steve Spurrier, on and on and on and on. He's a guy that I have my eyes on. I think he's going to continue to make ripples in the sport here for years to come.
Yeah, he's a special dude. We met in 2009, both interviewed at the same time on the same day with the Seahawks. And we all went to dinner. Everybody you interviewed went to dinner that night. We went up at the rooftop at the Hyatt in downtown Bellevue. I hope you're staying there. It's a great hotel. I think it's the Seahawks team hotel. And we're up there. We just happened to sit next to each other. And we just talked for hours. And from that moment on, it was like, whoa, here we go. And then to your point, you track his journey, from beginning in Gainesville with Steve Spurrier, to your point, those stickets, notes on his car, to now where he sits. I mean, I can remember 20 years ago where he was trying to get head jobs, and then 10 years ago, and then he finally got it at Arizona. And the thing I've always said about Jed is that he's always had a plan, like a really detailed one. I think a lot of coaches have that, but they also figure out, call it 30% on the fly. I think he figures out like 15% on the fly his first time as a head coach in Arizona. And you're right, his teams were always in it. I think his first year they go 1-11, man. 8 games, they're within a score to start the fourth quarter.
Yeah.
Right. And they had 4 starting quarterbacks, maybe 5 that season. Jim would be able to tell us because he's an Arizona alum. But yeah, I think UW is in a healthy place with him after losing Kalen DeBoer. Obviously a big hit. The thing that stood out to me last week, bro, 110 players among Indiana and Washington weren't on the roster a year ago. Think about that, those sidelines. So UW fans, it's okay. I know you know that. He'll get it going, and they got a lot of cap space for next year in the new world of college football. Jake, I just want to say, man, it has really been amazing to be a part of your squad. You have been aces from the beginning, welcoming myself, Guy, Ashley, Rhett, our entire team in from the West Coast into the Big Ten. And, you're just getting going in your career, man. It's so fun to watch you just keep kicking butt and being I know you're an awesome teammate, and you have been to me. So thank you again for the time, bro.
Hey, man, the feeling's mutual. And I know I've snuck on some of your Monday shows. Normally I'm Thursday for the Big Ten today. So I'm just happy we're hanging out here on another Monday, getting to talk ball, man. So it's always a pleasure. The feeling is mutual. Love listening to you and your crew, and looking forward to finishing the season strong with you, man.
I love it. Guy Haberman rolling out the big red machine. How many times can we say it this week?
I know I texted you this. Jim Harbaugh, he'd always say, who's got it better than us, right? And we'd all say nobody. Who's got it better than Rhett Lewis right now, man? The Hoosiers are freaking rolling. Just real quick, you got to tell me, what was the plane ride home like after that game with Rhett?
It was awesome, man. I mean, he's got such pride in his school. Right? He's been their voice on radio for the last couple of years. Now he jumps over and he's doing television. And as you know, and for the listeners of Y Option should know, because he's been on the show, he's an analyst. So he's down there. And it's so fun in games because we pick a couple drives where we just go analyst mode back and forth, and we're just playing out the game together. But to do a couple at Indiana and to be there this past weekend, sellout, standing room only, college game day, Big Noon was the week before. We start the show, he interviews head coach Curt Cignetti, and then he runs into the student section to do his open hit from the middle of that sea of red. And to do what he does, I mean, no offense to anybody, but I think he's the most impressive and maybe the most talented person I've seen, because he's doing Thursday night pre and post NFL on the Amazon game, takes a red eye to our game every weekend, and then flies back to work Sunday. And he's got an amazing wife and 2 sons. Like, I don't know how he does it, but he's my MVP of the season so far.
I'm with you.
Nobody's got better than
I'll
that.
back you up with that one. That's a great vote. Yeah, every time I turn on my TV, it's NFL Network, it's Big Ten Network, it's XM Radio. That guy, I don't know how he does it all, but he makes me rethink what's possible. It's really impressive.
And you know what, too? And like this bothers Guy and I, but Rhett Lewis can rock like the biggest ice cream. Like he can eat anything, he could drink anything and never be phased. I'm like, what is in your body, bro? Like anyway, he just keeps winning, which is great. Yeah, glad we got him on our squad. Glad to be on your squad as well. Thank you again, Jake Butt. Make sure you follow him on all of the socials. We'll obviously have that in the show notes. Jake, travel safe, finish strong, as I know you will in the final month of the season.
You too, Yogi. Thanks for having me on.
It's the Afterglow. We dive into the conversation. Jim Thornby, I'm Yogi Roth. That was Jake Butt, presented by our founding partner, 76, keeping you in the know on the go, go, go. Jim, takeaways, thoughts from that conversation with Jake?
Yeah, I mean, just another guy with great humility. I mean, it's funny because, this is a guy, junior year at Michigan. He gets, he's probably going to be maybe a second round pick in the NFL draft, decides he wants to come back for another year. Has another great season, but then tears his ACL in the Orange Bowl. That means he can't, be part of the combine, pro day, all that. Winds up dropping to a fifth round pick. Has more injury issues with the Broncos. There, has played about 3 years in the NFL. If not for those injuries, he's probably still playing for the Broncos right now, or at least in the NFL right now. But I love the way that he's been able to turn that adversity into perspective and to kind of be able to use that to kind of shape the way that he calls games on TV. So I think that's, especially for someone who's, he just said 29 years old, still someone who's still very young and has already gotten pretty good at doing this job.
Yeah, his future is tremendously bright. You reference his humility. I think he's just got, I said it to him in the interview, he's just got this sage element to him in terms of he's just got a wisdom that I think is unique for being that age. He's an old soul for sure. And I think the way he competes at the craft is something I just really respect. And also he's just a great teammate, man. We walked into this new place not knowing anybody, and it can be territorial at times. We all know the things that happen in everybody's workplace, those that you're listening, or whether you work at a sports television network. And he's been anything but territorial. He's been absolutely phenomenal. I enjoy getting on air with him every so often on a Monday, or tuning into the front end or the back end of his games, pending wherever we are on the Saturday slate. And I just think that he's a rising star in the profession. I know the Big Ten knows that. I'm sure everybody who tunes in knows that as well. And I think that the cool insight that he gave was around Michigan. And I think for Oregon, they're heading into a team, or they're heading in to face a team that is seemingly dramatically down. But they're coming off not only their best win of the season, in my opinion, but also finally they have it figured out. This is going to be their plan. They got Davis Warren, the Southern California native from Manhattan Beach, who's just amazingly inspirational, but also pretty talented. And now they got Alex Orji. They are going to give a tough test to Oregon, and a very physical defensive front seven. They can cover and run on the outside. So I think we're in for an epic Saturday game at the Big House. It's going to be so unique seeing those helmets collide. Michigan and Oregon, Jim, will just be really fun. So I enjoyed it. I know you did as well. If you missed our newsletter on Sunday, dive into it. I tap into 3 things that really inspired me, including the play of Ryan Helinski at Northwestern. It was awesome to watch him play in the fourth quarter of their ballgame. I hope he gets a shot the rest of the way. If you need any more information on that, just go to yoption.com. Check out what we wrote. It was just a reminder that this thing goes fast, as does life. Heck, Jim's got one of his kids in high school right now. How has that happened? It is flying by. The season is rolling, but we appreciate you and your support. Jim, I love you, man. Happy Monday. Enjoy this conversation. We'll see you later in the week. We got a quarterback that might start garnering a little Heisman attention coming as a special guest. Peace.